as we've seen attacks on transgender folk rise in both the UK and India, and indeed globally, the seminar seeks to understand how and why the targeting of the trans community forms the basis of fascist organising in both India and the UK. In the UK, we've seen a rise in racism and fascism in general. Only recently, I think yesterday, in fact, there have been racist riots in Northern Ireland, targeting of minority communities, given the rhetoric of minority communities being more dangerous to kind of Northern Irish identity. At the same time, we've also seen a targeting of transgender communities. In the UK, we recently had a court case that was funded by prominent transphobic individuals, such as the author J.K. Rowling, and they've redefined the meaning of sex in the UK. So effectively, that leaves transgender folk unsure of where they fit in everyday society, including not being able to access basic facilities like toilets. And what this all amounts to in general is a fear of the other, as is generally the case in fascism. There is a targeting of minority communities and a general language and rhetoric of excluding others or people who are deemed as not belonging to the national community. In India, the Modi government has had multiple attacks on multiple minority communities, not least the Muslim community, the Baloch communities, and that despite the decriminalization of transgender communities in India, the recent bill on what it means to be transgender, the Trans Persons Amendment Bill, which was passed in March 2026, it demands that in order for a person to be deemed as transgender, they need to undergo medical checks and be determined by the district magistrate if they are in fact trans, which is dehumanizing, pathologizing, and threatens to strip trans people of their dignity. So we will have the following speakers speak today on these issues. We begin with Grace Banu, pronouns she, her. Grace is a Dalit and trans activist and a software engineer. She was the first trans person to be accepted into an engineering college in Tamil Nadu, and she is the founder and director of Trans Rights Now Collective, a collective of transgender individuals in India, where she campaigns for trans representation, including fighting for horizontal reservations for trans people in Tamil Nadu, which would provide trans people a specific percentage of seats or posts within each existing category for reservation. We then have Hina Baloch, pronouns she, her. Hina is a researcher, writer, and a political organizer between Karachi and London, and a member of Pakistan's Khawaja Sira community. She has been organizing transgender communities since 2010 and is co-founder of Pakistan's first political transgender pride, Sindh Murat March, a Chevening scholar, a SOAS graduate in gender studies, and authoring a book on post-partition evolution of the Khawaja Sira culture in Pakistan. We will then have Arsen, pronouns are they, them. Arsen is a physics graduate and a community activist from Indore, Madhya Pradesh, focusing on queer welfare and social engagement, keeping intersectionality at its core. They are engaged in helping queer people find necessary organizational and peer support while facing issues of being a minority in a country where the far right has been exponentially rising at least for a decade now. Arsen has worked with the Solidarity Foundation in Bangalore, the Hridayam in Indore, and the Tapish Foundation, also in Indore. And then we will conclude with Lamble. And Lamble is they, them. Lamble is a writer, educator, and organizer with a focus on queer, feminist, and transformative approaches to safety, justice, and harm reduction. Their forthcoming book is Unsafe: The Carceral Roots of Anti-Trans Backlash. Lamble exposes how carceral approaches to safety fail to address root causes of harm, ultimately deepening social divisions and legitimizing new forms of violence and control. Each speaker will speak for about 12 to 15 minutes, and then we will have time for questions at the end. If you can post your questions in the chat, that would be great. You can either address them to individual people, or you can address them to the panelists in general. But do post them as we go along. We will be doing the questions at the end, though. Okay, so without further ado, should we have Grace begin?
Thank you, Neka. Thank you for your introduction, and I'm super happy to be part of this event. And in India, I mean, transphobia and the racism is across everywhere. So in that, I have to add transphobia, racism, and casteism is everywhere across the world, wherever the South Asians people are there. So I mean, the casteism is everywhere. So every day, being a Dalit, uh, trans, being a Adivasi trans, our community people are facing super kind of oppression. We are in the very lower level in the hierarchy of oppressions. So many years, particularly in India, they are yeah, celebrating 70 more than 70 years of independence. But this 70 years, our community people are doing begging on the street, and we are doing sex work. And recent, I mean, last uh, two or three decades, 2 decades only, our community members are focusing on the education and employment sector. So it's not happened very easily. We fought a lot. We filed so many petitions in the Madras, I mean, various high courts and the Supreme Courts, and we got very few positive judgments. So that is one of the judgment is Nalsa verdict. So Nalsa versus Union of India, it was uh, uh, the judgment was passed on 2014. From 2014 onwards, our community people are treating us as a fellow human, and we got some several rights uh, to recognize the trans people identity. So before 2014, particularly in Tamil Nadu, the medical examination things are happening. So the medical examining officers uh, who are cis people who don't know, who doesn't know about our issues. So they checked our body, and they checked our all the organs. They checked our all the private parts and everything. After that only they provide the ID card. For me, I'm the victim. So I also got the Tamil Nadu transgender ID card before 2014. So I faced that kind of discrimination. After that only I got the identity card. So now after 2016, I mean, the the bill, the act which was passed recently, uh, before it was bill, the Transgender Persons Protection Bill 2016, it was introduced by the fascist BJP government, which says initially they are like create lot of problem with the identifier identification. They said trans people means partially male nor partially female, wholly male nor wholly female. So this kind of Hindutva mythological definition they came came up with that kind of definition, and we fought a lot, and we we quote the Nalsa work, this judgment. It says self-identification. So it's against the Nalsa verdict. So we told it to the, I mean, a lot of community people. We raised the issues, and we demanded that issues. So finally, they came up with the 2016, uh, the several changes. So that changes. It's like self-identification and everything. Uh, so we were like, it's not fully happy, but we were like, we are not facing fully happy, but at least we have some rights, so we will utilize that. So it doesn't talk about our reservation rights. It doesn't talk about our employment rights and education rights. So that bill was like only talking about few things. So which is like it's unacceptable. But even though we, okay, this act is there, so we will have. So 2022 they passed the rules, and that rules, based on the rules, they change a lot of rules and regulation to for getting any documents. So 2026, they came up with the amendment bill. Uh, it says, it's completely dehumanizing. It's completely again, it's against the community. So it says we have to again go to the medical examinations. The district magistrate will have the decision authority to provide the transgender identity card. And this is A. And B, if you're trans person who supported another trans person, that is like, in India, trans people are, we are living with the, group, at least small groups. We are staying together. So we are supporting each other. So they are saying like, if you're a trans person who supported another trans person, it is a criminalizing. So it's a punishable offense. So they this act is saying, and it says like 12 to 15 years, 15 years the punishable offense. But at the same time, if any trans person who got faced the sexual harassment or any harassment, the cis people got the punishment. It's like, maybe not only cis people, the any people who harass the trans people, the punishment is minimum 6 months to 2 years. This is completely unfair. And this amendment bill also, it doesn't talk about our 2 decades for the strongest demand, horizontal reservation. So it doesn't talk about single word about the horizontal reservation, and it doesn't talk about below 80 trans persons who are facing domestic violence, domestic abuses in their within our own family. So that is like super unfair of situations we are facing in the our family. So within our family members are try to kill. So we have lot of cases, particularly 2023. We did a research. Uh, 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 that year, 33 trans persons are died. In that, and 80% of trans people are below 80, 30, below 30 trans, and and uh, 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 55% of face domestic abuses because of they died because of the domestic violence which is faced by their own family members. And they were few of them are killed by their relationships relations, and few of them are committed suicide. So this kind of young generations we are losing on one side. So we need to talk about how to protect this kind of youngsters. So that it doesn't talk about that, but it's only focusing on the identification. It's only focusing on the identity, and so that's why we were like completely opposed that, but unfortunately it was passed in both houses, Lok Sabha and Rajya Sabha, and we don't know how they are going to release rules. So, but we know one thing: if any law, any policy, it's coming, it will affect immediately Dalit and Adivasi people. It's immediately affect Dalit and Adivasi trans people. So, recent days here and there, a few cases we are getting from the Dalit and Adivasi community, where trans persons, they are struggling to get the identity card, the new identity card. So they are saying like we didn't have passed the rules, so you should wait. So we have to wait to when the website is open. Then only we have to apply the identity card. But what about if a trans person wants to go to a higher study? So they need to submit their documents. So they need identity card. So what they will do without identity card, they were not up to accept in the various institutions. So that kind of issues we are facing right now. So for me, transphobia and the casteism, the caste-based discrimination, it's happening everywhere, within the queer movement, within the larger level movement, feminist movement. Everywhere we are facing caste-based discrimination, and we're all fight against the patriarchy society. So for here, particularly in India, we are facing Brahmanical patriarchy of oppression. So uh, uh, again and again they are treating us a god, but they are not treating us as a human. So we are facing a lot of discriminations, a lot of oppressions. We don't know, the being an activist like me, in our next 5 years. Unfortunately, our state governments are new government, and we are trying to push the new government to pass the resolution in the assembly. So that process is, one side is going on, and another side, every day, every day, every second, our life is going to be like a threatening. Our life is going to be a unsafe situation. Our life is it's we are facing like unsafe secure situation right now. So we are also deserve for the peace. We are also deserve for the all the things to participate in the public spaces. But every day our life is going to be like a struggle and fight. So unfortunately, this all the things are happened. So uh, um, the transphobia, the solution is uh, particularly in Indian trans persons are facing right now uh, unsafe situations. So we are getting solidarity from the all other countries and all other movements. But uh, it's we want the strong solidarity. So every time our community people only coming forward to fight against the issues, but the majority of people that on other movements like Dalit movements, feminist movement, working class movement, so all other movements should come to give the solidarity for us, uh, because we're all fight for the equality. We all fight for the human, we are all, all the uh, all the space should be for all the people, not only particular people who have the privilege in the name of caste and class. So for my final thought is like, uh, so every day we are struggling, every day we are fighting. So we also want peace. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for that, Grace. Just to let the attendees know, um, because of the format and because we had to change it to a webinar, you can't actually post your questions. Um, oh wait, sorry, I'm correct. The chat doesn't work for you. But if you can post your questions using the Q&A function, which is at the bottom of the screen, that would be great. That's how we can receive your questions. So thank you so much, Grace. We will now have Hina to speak next. Thank you, Hina. Hina, I think your mic is off.
Hello, thank you so much for having me here. And what Grace pointed out and explained very diligently, I wanted to add into this conversation that um, when it comes to trans rights across South Asia, I'll be talking about Pakistan. It was in early 2009 when Pakistan's Supreme Court declared the Hijra community, and like locally known as the Khwaja community, as the third gender, and they instructed the parliament to legislate. It took then almost a decade for our parliament to legislate, and in 2018, landmark Trans Rights Act was enacted by the Pakistan's parliament. And while they were doing that, the religious political parties and opposition political parties, the ruling alliance, and the Hijra communities and the broader trans and gender non-conforming communities and, and activists were taken on board. So we had a very thorough and detailed consultation before the parliament enacted the law. Um, right after that, so while we were doing that, we were very mindful because what you see today as the street visibility across Pakistan, they are the Khwaja community, which like we are an organized community for centuries. But when the government was passing this law, so we knew that there are people outside the culture of the Khwaja community. There are trans people, those who are not Khwaja, they are intersex and gender non-binary people, those who are not the part of the Khwaja culture. And we were quite okay with it, and we still are. And we pushed government to, if they are legislating for once, so because under the directives of the Supreme Court, they were to legislate for the third gender community. But if the government was legislating, we really wanted everybody with different gender expressions to be included in it. So hence we pushed the government to do that. So it was comparatively what kind of legislations were being passed in Pakistani parliament in the history. Comparatively, it was a lot progressive piece of legislation as compared to what we had before. Um, it did include trans people, gender non-binary people outside outside the Khwaja Sara culture, and also there is this one thing when it comes to Pakistan, we cannot, unlike India, we cannot legislate outside the constitutional framework of Pakistan. For example, like things need to be, they need to align with the Islamic and constitution which is there in place since 1973, and nobody is there to challenge that, neither our opposition nor our ruling elites. So we had to stay or play within that boundary. So you're very much mindful of doing that, because not abiding by that, it means the state is gonna snatch away whatever limited freedoms you have right now. And when it comes to the rights, we are already a very vulnerable, marginalized gender minority in Pakistan. So due to that, in 2018, when the law was successfully enacted, so that was the time when we started registering ourselves in Pakistan's national database as the third gender with the gender marker X on our ID cards and passports. But so since the law was really nice at that time. It was giving us what we really wanted. So there were many people, those who did not identify as third gender. They were either binary trans men or trans women. They wanted gender marker either M or F on their identity documents, which they did get. Uh, but right after that, the COVID happened and the lockdown came. And in 2019 and 2020, we saw this because everybody was at like it locked up inside their homes. So the Pakistani right wing decided what they should do, what they should be targeting in this free time. Instead of building or helping the communities across Pakistan during the COVID, they decided to launch an online hate campaign against the Khwaja community in also like to punish us because we did not only stop when the government asked or told us that we are going to give you some limited freedoms as the recognized third gender, historically recognized third gender, but we demanded government to also recognize the other communities, those who do not fall into the Khwaja category. So the right wing decided to punish us, and they launched a very violent online social media campaign, bullying, doxing, targeting trans rights activists, Khwaja activists, all across Pakistan, attacking their homes as well. And that was the time when the only piece of legislation, after which, by the way, India followed uh, when Pakistan passed it. So our federal Shariat court, like the public perception changed after that. The public became hostile towards the gender diverse communities. After the 2 years of successful hate campaign ran on social media by Pakistan's Jamaat-e-Islami, and there is a group of YouTubers, televangelists called Youth Club, and there is a fashion designer who is a well-known turf in Pakistan. Her name is Maria B. She is often called J.K. Rowling of Pakistan. So they all successfully challenged Trans Rights Act 2018 in Pakistan's Shariat court. Once that happened, we decided to mobilize and politically organize all across Pakistan, and the Khwaja community took it out to the streets of Karachi. That's when the Murat March happened. And what was the problem back then is that um, it was really hard for us to convince other groups, other activist bodies in Pakistan that our rights are not secondary. We are as much citizens and humans as much as you all are. So it took us some time, but we did build alliances with the Baloch community, the Shia communities, the Hindu and the Sikh communities, the Christian communities. So in Pakistan, all these religious minorities and the linguistic groups such as the Pashtuns and the Balochs are quite marginalized. So we did make kind of a united front, which our military establishment did not like. So they started more violent crackdowns against trans people, and after that, there was this verdict of the Federal Shariat Court in which they scrapped important articles of the Trans Rights Act. But we did not stop there. We immediately challenged the decision of the Federal Shariat Court into Pakistan's Supreme Court, which, by the way, is still under review. So, as per the Constitution of Pakistan, if there is a decision by the Shariat Court and that is being challenged in the Supreme Court, and Supreme Court judges are still reviewing it, so the original law is still in place, so it's still not scrapped. So what is happening right now is that we challenged the verdict in 2022, And now it's 20, we are mid past 2026. And what solution our government came up with is that uh, the the verdict is still under review. So according to the government, our laws is still in place. So this is what they are trying to do, bare minimum, to save us. But save us from whom? That is the question, because one day or another, the Supreme Court judges will announce their verdict. So we are quite uncertain still that what that verdict is going to be. Will it uphold the decision of the Federal Shariat Court, or will it going to uh, support the Constitution of Pakistan, or the originally enacted Bill 2018, Trans Rights Act of 2018, which we are also supporting. Right after that, things got quite violent in Pakistan for the trans organizers, those who were on the forefront of the struggle. I was briefly abducted and assaulted by Pakistani law enforcement agencies, but later as soon as I got released, I relocated from Karachi to other cities, and then I fled the country. I came to UK. Since then, I've been here, but after coming here and navigating the crisis of migration and asylum systems in UK, I must say that initially I was really when I initially came to UK in the fall of 2023, I thought that things will be better here as compared to what we saw in Pakistan, but gradually, slowly, that that idea of safety faded, because the kind of transphobic rhetoric we see here in West, in UK, like when Rishi Sunak started mocking trans people, and how the right wing here operates, it's quite similar how right wing in Pakistan operate. And I believe that the public support here is way too less as compared to the public support what we have back at home in Pakistan. And especially the government is quite hostile towards LGBT refugees all across the world, not only from the trans communities of Pakistan. And one more thing which is quite surprising is that I saw trans people from India in quite unsafe conditions living in UK, and they wanted to escape violence from their families. And right now what is happening in India from the Indian government as well. But since the Indian state is considered a safe country in the asylum systems of UK, I believe that Indian trans communities are more vulnerable in diaspora in UK as compared to any other trans people belonging to any other South Asian country. So after Afghanistan, of course. So it is something quite alarming, and we have been working with the local government, with local trans organizations and activist bodies to address this issue here as well. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much for that, Hina. We're already seeing patterns emerge between how legislation is being used to target trans communities. So if any of you have any questions related to either of those, please post them in the Q&A. Next, we have Arsen. So Arsen, if you would like to speak, go ahead.
Yes, thank you so much. And unfortunately, I'm not able to turn on my video at this moment because my device is heating up. So I apologize for that. And yeah, in addition to the points that are already being made by Grace and Hina, I would like to add that there was a recent Supreme Court hearing about a separate case, which was not about queer people. My memory doesn't serve me right. I forgot what it was. But even though the case was passed and the petitioners, Supreme Court made this point that we cannot make laws and policies according to constitutional morality. And this is a very general statement. This speaks to all the petitions filed across any movements, be it queer movement, trans-liberation movement, feminist movement, and anti-caste against anti-caste laws. Because if the government does not want to act on constitution, And the Supreme Court wants to back those politicians. Those are favored by the ruling oppressive government. Then we have to ask at some point, how far are we willing to make the Constitution redundant? Because when Supreme Court makes these kind of statements, it feels like Constitution is just there for decorative purposes. There is already so much anti-caste bias. There is so much Muslim violence in Muslims and Sikhs and Christians in race. Regards to the trans bill, we also saw when I was in the press conference during March, when all of this was happening, before it being passed in Lok Sabha and eventually in Rajya Sabha, were two of the major points that we raised were that how the bill adopts the very colonial language that we so proudly celebrate our 75 years of independence from, which is quite ironic. I believe the act was Tribal Act of 1871 or 1873, which was imposed by the British rule to punish whoever that does not fall into this very idea of sanctity, be it tribal people, be it lower caste people, and even trans people. At that time, given the social environment at that time, trans people were not even called trans. That they were called eunuchs. And they would punish those people who helped those trans people at that time were also being subjugated to violence, or also being subjugated to uh, oppression from the government, which is something that we see in the recent trans bill as well. It's not only that trans people can be punished by the bill, but if you are a parent of a trans child who is not strictly belonging to a Hijra community or a Chola community, then your parents can be punished and they can face fines and imprisonment. If you go to an NGO or to a career support group in your college or university or workplace, they can face legal action. So there's this factor of alienation, since we are not accounting the constitution or morality as stated by Supreme Court earlier. And there is also quite a bit of racism and xenophobia involved in the trans bill, because it does not take many other regional trans communities into account, especially from the northeastern India. It's already facing major issues when it comes to social and political stability ever since we gained independence and assimilated into the union. Like recently, the Manipur violence has been going on for so long. And there is also Nupi Mambi communities, which are also regional trans communities in Manipur. They are not included in the trans bill. They are not even acknowledged. It doesn't say that, oh, they are not called, they won't be considered actual trans people, quote unquote, by the law. Their existence is just not acknowledged. That speaks to this idea of the current government on the restrictions of what they will consider as people. Not only do you have to be the right caste, but you have to be born in the right state. You have to be born in the particular body as they want you to, and only then maybe you will receive any support from the government. And if you try to seek support from anywhere else apart from the government, then not only you are in trouble, but those people who are helping you are also in the trouble. And this whole rise of far-right politics in both countries, in UK and India, like I remember in 2024, Posey Parker was coming to Sheffield when I was studying in University of Sheffield, and we had staged a protest against it. And around the same time, we had a Free Palestine and camp going on in before they were forced to move away from the university campus. But there was solidarity between both the movements, and both were protesting at the same time. But you do not see this in, I can't speak for South Asia as broadly, but in India, there is fragmentation of left politics as well. when the caste protests were going on, when people were speaking about it, there was a lot of opportunism even from the queer community itself. Figures like Lakshminarayan Tripathi, some of you might know them, they actively went ahead and supported trans bill. They actively went ahead and congratulated the Prime Minister for bringing such a revolutionary bill because they do fit this definition. They do come from the upper caste Hindu speaking. In this demographic that the government wants them to. Just to score a few brownie points with the government, it was actually passed. They went ahead against the consensus of the wider committee, which at the time this bill in high courts first, because we know that if we go directly to Supreme Court, we are not going to get desired results, as Supreme Court is already very much filled with benches backed by conservative politicians. So that was a real concern at the time, but very powerful. And many petitions were filed in Delhi High Court, Maharashtra, Karnataka, Tamil Nadu, Bihar, West Bengal. But some opportunities went ahead and filed petition directly in the Supreme Court, which was rejected at first because the language was not very legally appropriate. And there were accusations of it being AI generated. Not sure how much of that is true, but those were the reasons the petition in Supreme Court by Lakshminarayan was rejected. And this led into a spiral of government ordering all the petitions filed in these different high courts to be brought directly to the Supreme Court, because Supreme Court is one court that they can actually control, where they can say that we cannot abide morality, which is at the very least is not a good look on any kind of liberation movement. Especially if you're a trans Muslim, especially if you're a Dalit trans person, or if you belong to born in a community, or as Hina already mentioned, there's a lack of consideration for Khwaja Sara community as well. So these identities do get acknowledged out the existence of this in a very regressive and very stringent bill that they want to pass. And this speaks to a wider any identity, be it religious identity or minority, be it identity, if it does not fit into a particular box that oppressive regimes wanting to control, or if they're willing to even make for them, and it's not a good look for them. If you can't control it, they're bad. We cannot have any say from the part of view, the demographic that they want to use power against. This is the kind of regressive politics that is taken into action every now and then. It's not only like it recently has really been for boards and decades since 2014, but it has existed somewhat before as well. I would not deny that, although it has few years.
Arsen, sorry, I think you're breaking up a little bit. It's difficult to hear you.
Is it fine? Hello, are you able to hear me?
Yes. I think so. If you keep speaking.
Yeah, so like I was saying, any kind of identities that do not fit into particular boxes, be it a caste minority or a religious minority or a gender minority, these identities are harder to control when you want to have a fascist government, when you want to have an oppressive government. So these do get written out of laws and policies. They do get taken out of consideration when passing any kind of bills, which gives more and more reason to the government who is trying to silence to justify it.
Amazing. Thank you so much for that, Arsen. Sorry about the connection issues. I'm sure that broke your flow a little bit. I apologize for that. We are going to conclude now with our final speaker, Lamble.
Thank you so much for the invitation to join this panel of incredible activists. I'm really struck by the similarities between the kind of struggles across India, Pakistan, and the UK, both in terms of what we're currently up against, but also in terms of the urgency for meaningful transnational solidarity. So I just want to say a big thank you to Kalpana and Neha and everyone involved in organizing, and to Grace and Hina and Arsen for your comments. So I've been tracing the rapid rise of kind of organized transphobia in the UK for about 10 years now. And I do not think it's a coincidence that that rise of organized transphobia has coincided with an acceleration of the organized far right and a wider shifting of public discourse in ways that have made transphobia, racism, and anti-immigrant sentiment far more mainstream and acceptable and palatable. Since around 2017, we've seen major rollbacks on trans equality in terms of access to gendered spaces, healthcare, education, and prison policy. We've seen a major escalation in trans hostile political and media environments that have dovetailed with this acceleration of racist anti-migrant sentiment. We've seen a rise in reported hate crime and violence and vigilante violence against migrants and people of color, including, what we've seen in Belfast this week. I'm always a little hesitant to raise this because it's very problematic, but Britain, many people have been talking in the last couple of weeks about Britain falling very dramatically in the annual country rankings undertaken by ILGA. Britain was top place in 2015, and it's now dropped to 22nd place. And, many people have rightly critiqued these kinds of global rankings for their Eurocentric and colonial bias. And that is something that we definitely need to hold. But just also the fact that Britain has fallen so significantly, even on its own terms, I think is very striking. And I think it's also striking because Britain had previously tried to kind of pride itself on being a so-called global leader on LGBT rights. I would say often in a pinkwashing way, but we've really seen this shift from trying to pitch itself that way to this very active rollback. And obviously anti-trans politics and racist politics and culture are not new in Britain. And debates about trans rights, particularly within feminist and women's spaces, are longstanding. But what is different about the current moment is that the anti-trans movement is very well organized. And it has been very successful in shifting the broader political, legal, and media environment, and also in increasingly shifting public opinion. And I would say that's also what we're seeing in terms of the right, and the far right is far more organized than it's in how it's manifesting its politics. And that impact on public opinion, I think, is significant. So, the British Social Attitude Survey has shown a rapid drop in support for trans people over a very short period of time. So drop in support for changing sex on birth certificates from 58% in 2016 to 24% in 2023. We've also seen an 18-point decline in the number of people who describe themselves as not at all prejudiced towards trans people. And we're seeing these shifts even though other social attitudes around family forms, sexual relationships, and abortion have continued to liberalize. So this is actually quite a significant and rapid shift. Now, when we think about opinion polls, we also have to, these are kind of broad, the British Social Attitude Survey is looking across a broad section. And when you drill down into specific demographics, you see a lot of important differences. And one of those important differences is that women and cis women and lesbians and bisexual women are often amongst the most trans inclusive. So this idea that kind of women are against trans rights or lesbians are against trans rights is not empirically accurate. And of course, we've seen the impact of this organized transphobia culminate in the Supreme Court ruling in For Women Scotland, issued in April 2025, and on the legal definition of sex in the Equality Act 2010. And the ruling and its interpretation have effectively overturned 20 years of legal and policy precedent, which previously recognized trans people's legal sex as a basis for protection from discrimination. So not just their gender reassignment or sex reassignment, but their legal sex status as the basis for protection from discrimination. So this is a major rollback of trans rights. And the ruling and the subsequent guidance, so people will know, I'm sure, that the guidance has been recently released. The Equality and Human Rights Commission's guidance on interpreting the Equality Act is currently in Parliament. And that the combination of the guidance, the ruling itself and the guidance has really radically shifted the policy terrain from one where the exclusion of trans people was previously only permitted in exceptional circumstances to one where exclusion will now become the default norm and inclusion becomes the exception. Now, I want to put a huge caveat around this. I'm talking about the formal legal framework for this, and I have a lot of skepticism, as I'm sure many people on this call have, around the difference between what formal protections in law mean versus what actual protections on the ground mean. And I actually think this is where we have a lot of scope for resistance. But I would say this shift, this kind of dramatic shift, was the result of both a manufactured political crisis of safety, namely a trans moral panic, and a manufactured legal problem, a revisionist interpretation of the Equality Act, which, when combined with strategic litigation and bankrolled by billionaire J.K. Rowling, it basically allowed regressive and illiberal rights stripping measures to be framed as necessary for public protection. And so I'm also, as a critical legal scholar, I'm skeptical of rights, but we are in a position now where we're trying to kind of push back against even, this kind of rights stripping practice that we are seeing. And I would say in many ways, the more significant impact is not just the formal interpretation of the law or the formal change of the law, but rather how the social interpretation of that law is taken up publicly. And this is where I think the organized groups are actually they have a lot of power and influence in trying to get people to feel like we have to implement things in particular ways. And there is actually a lot of scope to resistance. But we've seen the way in which the ruling and the guidance are functioning to rationalize, justify, and normalize both the formal and informal policing and exclusion of bodies that are deemed out of place. And so trying to literally expel certain bodies of where they don't belong. And so whether that's bodies who are deemed as not properly gendered or not properly sexed, or those deemed as not properly belonging to the nation, as we see what's happened in Belfast and kind of attempts to literally expel people of color perceived as migrants from their own homes and communities. All of this and what the infrastructure of the Supreme Court ruling and the guidance does is it normalizes that, and it escalates and normalizes what I would say far right and fascist discourses more broadly. And this is why we should be very alarmed about it. So whether we're concerned about trans rights or not, the reinterpretation of the Equality Act is a narrowing of equality rights protections in ways that will have impact on everyone. So how did we get here? And I think this question is really important because one of the things that I think is quite specific and somewhat unique to the UK, although we're seeing the same pattern starting to happen elsewhere, is that the anti-trans backlash is not limited to the right or the religious conservatives and nationalists. So those are, if you look around the world in most places, and I think that I'd be interested to hear more about how this is playing out in India and Pakistan, but in most cases around the world, if you are anti-trans, you're generally on the right. But in the UK, some of the most prominent and well-organized anti-trans backlash initially came from people who claimed to be on the right and from feminists. They were really instrumental in the early organizing of the anti-trans backlash here, which has obviously been taken up by corporate media and by conservative actors and by conservative funders. And, there's a whole mix of players that are shaping this environment. But I think we need to pay attention to the fact that left and liberals and feminists are also playing into this escalation of far-right discourses. And why I think we need to pay attention is because I think whether they're actually feminists or actually leftists is a question that we can debate, but their claiming of that position is partly what enables them to repackage what are deeply regressive, conservative, and authoritarian ideas and repackage them into palatable and mainstream ideas. And so I think they're part of the vehicle that turns these ideas more mainstream. They're laundering far-right ideas and repackaging them as efforts to protect cis women and children. And here I'm drawing partly on the work of Alysi Tudor, both in the work they've done on the links between the global anti-gender movement and the British gender critical movement and their links to growing fascist politics, but also on a joint project that we're working at that's looking specifically at the role of anti-trans feminists and in what they're doing in terms of feeding fascism. And so leftist, gender critical, how am I doing for time? Okay. Maybe I'll skip that. Okay. I can talk about J.K. Rowling if you're interested, because I think she's a kind of a key player that does this laundering work and is actively, sorry?
So you have about 5 or so minutes. So I think you have enough time to talk about it.
Okay. So, there's been a lot of discussion amongst the gender critical feminists about when they should align with the right and whether they should or shouldn't. And so I'm going to take this quote from J.K. Rowling, who kind of justifies her affiliations with right-wing women on this kind of grounds of necessity. And so I'm going to quote her: "There are women with whom I make common cause in the turf wars that I disagree with on other things. With obvious limits," and she puts in brackets, "sucking up to literal Nazis, I don't particularly care about their personal politics. The reality is that there is currently an assault on women's rights unparalleled in my lifetime, and it's coming from both the left and right. If ever there was a time for women across the political spectrum to come together, it is now." So this is the kind of classic, creating a crisis situation that means that there has to be a kind of right stripping process and response, like a classic kind of fascist strategy. And her emphasis on the urgency of the issue as necessitating cross-political alliances, alongside her explicit disavowal of the far-right literal Nazis, works to actively disassociate her position from fascism, even though she contributes to and literally funds right stripping measures for a scapegoated minority group, namely trans people. And so I think to make sense of this current moment and to effectively resist it, we have to think about what are the things that are linking the left and the right in this anti-trans mobilization. And a key aspect of that is, as has already come up in the discussions, the weaponization of safety and the narratives of sexual danger that have been used to, I would say, link the left and right strands of anti-trans politics. So it's this weaponization of safety claims. So if you trace the organized anti-trans movement, it was initially framed in the mainstream media as a kind of clash between identities. So women's rights and trans rights were deemed in conflict. But I would argue that the backlash escalated significantly when gender critical campaigners began to appeal to safety claims by suggesting not just that trans rights and women's rights were in conflict, but that trans rights pose an acute danger to women and children. And so campaigns to exclude trans women from women's spaces were mounted on grounds of safety. Rhetoric around protecting children from trans ideology was framed through safeguarding claims. Opposition to trans inclusion in sport was reframed from concerns around fairness to warnings about physical harm and violence to women. And by claiming that trans rights threaten the safety of non-trans women and children, anti-gender critical and anti-gender campaigners could appeal to cross-political constituencies by reframing attacks on trans rights as common sense protective measures for women and children. And so guarding against the kind of potential trans sex predator became a key rallying point around which conservatives, liberals, and leftists could converge. And so, anyway, I've only got 2 minutes left. Okay, so I mean, you can see how this happens, right? Because conservatives want to protect our women and children through this kind of chivalry conservative politics, and feminists want to protect women through a kind of very narrow understanding of a kind of quality framework that's based on a kind of exclusionary politics. But I would say what brings them together is their investment in what I would call carceral safety politics. So the idea that we generate safety by identifying the kind of dangerous other and excluding them from our community. And so it's basically the safety of one group becomes contingent on the unsafety of another group. And so this is why, and I can talk about in the questions if people are interested, I think we see this very clearly in the Supreme Court ruling. We see it in the EHRC guidance. The Supreme Court ruling, we saw safety come up in the judgment 19 times. And so I think this is a kind of key strategy that we need to be thinking about in terms of how we mobilize against the current moment. And so this is why I would argue that a feminist, queer, trans, anti-carceral approach, so abolition and prison abolition, police abolition approach is actually really necessary for us in how we build our strategies to resist the far right and the left anti-trans strands, because I think what we need to do is develop a different vision of safety that is not carceral, that is actually about material collective safety. How do we keep each other safe? How do we do that through resources, through infrastructures of care and support, and through practices of radical solidarity? Because otherwise, I think it's not enough to just push back against the framing of trans people or migrants or people of color as risky or dangerous, because the dangerous other shifts to a different group. What we actually need to do is challenge the underlying logics that present the safety of some as contingent on the safety of others. And I think we need to recognize that the tactics we use against the far right are not necessarily the same tactics that we need to use against left and liberal anti-trans deployments. And sometimes those tactics will backfire if we use the same ones in terms of both groups. And so I'm really interested in, one of the reasons I was really excited about this conversation is because I'm very interested in how we talk about sharing strategies across contexts. So recognizing that our contexts have similarities and differences, and we can't simply just import a strategy from one place or to another, but how can we look at the kind of patterns? How can we look at what has worked in our communities and what isn't working? And how do we build a more robust, radical, genuinely transnational politics of solidarity? So thanks.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you to all our speakers, Grace, Hina, Arsen, and Lamble. I'm actually going to start. So we have a few questions here in the chat, but actually I'm going to start with a question that someone has posted for Lamble. And it leads on to, I think, quite nicely what you were talking about there at the end about strategizing, about how to organize against this kind of restriction against rights. And the person is asking, you mentioned that the right are better at organizing, which I agree with. How do you think those who oppose the right can organize better without utilizing some of the harmful mythologies used by them? For example, hierarchical leadership, use of social media, uniting over a singular cause, and lack of intersectionality or nuance, especially given, as all the speakers have demonstrated, we need to organize internationally. So I think we can start with you, maybe Lamble, and then I think if others want to join in on the kind of organizing internationally, then please do so.
Great, thanks for the questions. So the first one on the skeptical of rights. So it partly comes from my organizing has primarily been, through prisoner solidarity. So I do work to support primarily queer and trans people in prison. And there it's very clear the limitations of rights frameworks. So it's not that I think we shouldn't fight for rights or that we shouldn't have rights, but I think generally in liberal democracies, I think rights are often, they have a certain kind of shallowness to them, and they can often be very individualized. And what they don't do is necessarily, first of all, we rarely get economic rights protected through these rights frameworks. And I actually think economic rights are the ones that, when we can make sure that people have access to the resources that they need, those are often the things that are more likely to keep people safe. But also I think rights frameworks the people who can access rights frameworks tend to be the more privileged people. So in prison, you might have all sorts of rights on paper, but what you actually get is very little. And so my skepticism is not that I am part of the movements that are pushing back against these rollback of rights. But I guess for me, rights are never enough. And so rights are a tool that are important to help limit harm reduction, but I don't think we'll ever get liberation from rights. And so I want a more expansive vision of social, economic, and racial justice.
Go ahead, Hina.
Hi, so I just wanted to add on to what Lamble said that in Pakistan we once had a meeting with the DG jails in Karachi, and they took us to some of the trans organizers to this section of Karachi Central Jail, and they told us that we have so you guys had an issue that trans women shouldn't be kept with male prisoners, so and of course we can't keep you with women prisoners, so we have created this separate cell for trans prisoners. For prisoner rights, we are doing a lot, and we were like, you have created this cell to fill this place like with the people of our kind, so we are working against we are working actually to abolish prisons altogether. We do not want prisoners rights within the prison. We do not want to be imprisoned, so our focus was also like when we talk about Sindh Murat March, like as a grassroots political movement, even then that question did arise that in the neighboring India they abolished they scrapped section 377. So what do trans people think about this in Pakistan? And we knew that talking about this in Pakistan even today can land you like in hot waters in a way that you can be lynched by a mob. So we knew how to prioritize our demands and our struggles. So our motive and our goal was also to achieve economic safety first. We wanted horizontal reservations in Pakistan. We wanted the state to build safe houses and shelters run by trans people, funded by taxpayers' money. Other things within this constitutional frameworks of rights did become secondary, not primary, because even like I imagine in Pakistan, we were also like struggling for to secure safety and economic safety foremost first. Thank you.
Thanks. Just to draw attention to the second part of the question that was asked, which is about organizing. Do any of you have thoughts on how to organize internationally, how to organize without creating hierarchies which effectively kind of damage solidarities or don't consider intersectional conditions?
I can say something, but I also want to make space for other speakers.
Go ahead, Lamble.
Okay. I mean, one of the things I was really struck by when I've been doing this research, so I did attend some of these gender critical feminist events, and I was really struck by how good they are at really welcoming people in, making them feel included. You know, I think sometimes in less spaces, we can actually be a little bit grouchy and harsh. Like we sometimes, people don't say the right thing in the right way, or we can be a bit prickly sometimes, or maybe that's just my experience sometimes. And I think there is something about I think the gender critical feminists in particular have been very good at building community. Now they build that community through exclusion. It's like they're building it through what they're opposed to rather than what they're for. But I think more successful organizing is we can have shared visions of what we are actually for, and we can build it in a way that is actually welcoming and supportive, and where people feel energized and want to be part of something. And I think that comes from, I take a lot of inspiration from models that are like, we build the things that we need in our community, and people will want those things and will join and be part of our movements. And I think there's something about then also always when we're organizing at the local level, always trying to connect to the, transnational level as well, so that we are keeping both the kind of local and the transnational in our organizing visions and our organizing practices. I'd love to hear what other people, I'm sure there's people who are joining on the call who also have lots of thoughts and experience about this.
Thank you. Arsen, did you want to come in?
Yes, on the same thing, after adding on to Lamble, what they said. I also believe it is important to think what we are trying to achieve with organizing locally or internationally with respect to queer movements and feminist movements in particular. It is easier and more important to first organize locally as opposed to internationally. I'm not saying we shouldn't organize internationally. We absolutely should. But if we are unable to challenge the local governments first, the local public attitudes towards any movements, then the international action would not be as fruitful either. Like Lamont mentioned, it is easier to just talk to people first, the people around us in our universities, in our workplaces, to let them know what kind of language to use, to how to treat and not treat people from different backgrounds. That is like a smaller step, but it does shift the public attitude towards minorities. After that, we can go on challenging regressive policies, regressive legislations. And while doing that, we can try to organize internationally, but there has to be a local base on which you build upon for any kind of organization.
Thank you, Arsen. I'll ask another question that was asked in the chat in the Q&A. I think it's EC from Turkey who asked this question. An increase in homophobia and transphobia is correlated with an increase in anti-migrant and anti-Muslim and anti-caste and other forms of racism in both the global north and the global south. What relationship do you think exists between these two forms of hateful ideology and practice? So I think, Arsen, go ahead. You wanted to come in on this.
Yeah, so during my time, I think I already spoke on it, but I'm not sure if I was breaking up. But that is a point that I try to make quite often, that when there is regressive politics, be from the left, right, or center, as Lamble already mentioned, that rise of transphobia also exists within leftist politics in UK. There are three major points that we should take into consideration. There is nationalism, there is scapegoating, and there is also this perceived threat from foreign elements of any kind. Like if we speak about UK, um, I haven't lived in UK for much longer, but as far as I know, anybody who's Muslim is perceived as a foreign element and not a British. Not in legal terms, but in a sociological terms, right? If there is somebody who's trans, they are not the right kind of British. If there's somebody who's not a Christian, they are also following the wrong religion. And we can see this translate into specifically India as well. Because in India, if you don't speak Hindi, you're not Indian enough. If you are from northeastern communities, you look slightly different, not, and then you're not Indian enough to be taken into account while passing policies and legislation. And this exists because politics are usually driven around around the idea of nationalism, like what are we as a people of a particular country? What is our identity as people who live in that country? And the wider you make that box, the more accommodations you make from people from different backgrounds, it becomes harder and harder for your political agenda to be carried on forward. Comes to scapegoating, like Lamble already mentioned, in feminist movements in UK, when they start with working against trans sex predators in the feminist movements, that is a scapegoating that we often see. When a regressive politician wants to uh, suppress the definition of people who count as people of India, or people who count as those belonging to Pakistan or Bangladesh or UK or any country, they need to find a common enemy, because they usually don't like to address the flaws in their governance. They can't, they're not willing to go on public record and say, oh, why is the infrastructure so bad? Or why is there inflation or any of kind of economical or sociological issues? So they would rather find a scapegoat than blame themselves and work on it and take accountability. because finding a scapegoat is easier because it also makes your idea of nationalism much smaller, which gives you more freedom to work on your regressive bills that you want to pass or any kind of discrimination legislation that you want to pass. Yeah, so usually that's what I believe happens. They find a scapegoat rather than taking accountability for any kind of mishaps in the country. And the scapegoat also gets turned into non-national or foreign elements, be it an immigrant, be it a queer minority, be it a religious minority or a caste minority.
Thank you, Arsen. Did anyone else want to come in on that question? Sorry, Lamble, I didn't see your hand up yet.
No, that's okay. I mean, on that note of scapegoating, I do think that one of the really useful frameworks within, feminist, anti-carceral, or abolitionist politics is the concept of no one is disposable. And because I think when we start with that, it actually can act as a kind of guard against the politics that wants to try and say it's this particular group that's to blame, or it's this group, and if we just get rid of this group, or we just remove, or keep these people out of this space, that somehow we will have safety, or we'll have our economic needs met, or whatever it is. And I think that can be a really useful, if we hold that principle and then we organize around that and we really challenge the logics of disposability that are sort of central to far right fascist and anti-trans politics. I think we can create a more capacious version of safety and community and collectivity that people will want to turn to, because the flip side of excluding a politics of kind of exclusion and expulsion and punishment is you never know when they're going to turn against you. And so do we want to have a politics that is about radical safety and life thriving for everyone, or do we only want it for some? And so I think I have found that as a useful kind of framing device.
Thank you. Yeah, that sits really well with what I was describing about South Asia Solidarity Group, which is the notion that no one is free until everyone is free. There is one more question in the chat. The question is, what grassroots trans-led organizations should we be supporting or amplifying, and how do we show solidarity with them? Maybe actually if we can start with panelists speaking about the organizations that maybe you are active in, the ones that you have led, ways in which maybe we can support you to continue doing the work that you're doing.
Yeah, sorry, that was a very generalized question from me, but yeah, I just wanted to give everyone a chance to talk about causes that they wanted to amplify for people in the audience.
Yes, I think I can speak on that a bit. I primarily work these days with Hridayam, which is a queer culture collective in Indore. It was made by my friend who lives in Indore and is currently pursuing PhD in Delhi. But the kind of sessions that we have are mostly literature based. Like we look at queer recognition in films and media. We don't delve, this group in particular does not delve much in the political and legislation part of it, but although we do take part in protests and any kind of panels that happen across the country or outside it. And it's mostly a city-based organization. We are in that, and we do often talk about the legal awareness when it comes to queer people, because that is also important when you want to talk about any kind of representation in queer literature or other parts of the general media, right?
Thanks. And is there a way that we can support you? Is there, do you have a Patreon or something along those lines?
We do not have a Patreon, but we are trying to do a street play in India to raise awareness about what a trans person is, because me and Grace, we did talk a lot about what people's perceived idea of a trans person is, which in India, usually it is like a trans or an intersex woman and nothing beyond that. So we are trying to do a street play, although we haven't formalized it yet, but we are trying. We would try to fundraise for it. When it goes live, we can forward the details. Otherwise, the another way to support is to join our sessions online whenever can. Of course, it might not be possible for everyone to join offline sessions, but we do often have sessions about legal literacy, about cartography, and generally in literature and media. So yes, we can follow those details when we have upcoming events, especially because it's Pride Month. So we are planning a few online sessions as well. So yeah, that's usually what we look for in terms of support, more than the monetary one, is participation. And you can also check out Hridayam's official page on Instagram just in case you miss any news from us. It would always be on Instagram. I can put it in the chat.
I also have a response from Hina. Hina says that her connection is not very good at the moment, so she's asking me to read out the response. She says, in the context of Pakistan, Sindh Murat March, especially because we don't take money from the government or NGOs, they are mostly looking for press coverage from trans solidarity groups internationally, because that triggers the Pakistani state to then negotiate with them in Pakistan. So if they get bad press overseas, then they are more likely to get heard in Pakistan. She also says there is a need to build a network of political organizers and writers which cannot coordinate whenever needed in their respective countries to create noise in a way that matters. So I think probably things like this, inviting them onto panels to discuss their politics and to raise awareness sounds like a good way to show support for them.
So I would give a shout out to a few different organizations. One is the Bent Bars Project, which I organize with. We are always, so it's mostly a pen pal project. We link queer and trans people inside prison with queer and trans people outside prison. We just ask if you want to sign up. We're always looking for pen pals, so people who are willing to write one letter a month. It's old school handwriting, not typed. Also, our sibling project, Lavender Pages, organizes to send books to queer and trans prisoners in the UK, so they're a good project to support. Other projects, Trans Kids Deserve Better. I take a lot of inspiration from the work that they do. Queers for Palestine, always, in terms of doing transnational solidarity work, big shout out. Transaxual is also doing a lot of good work in terms of trying to organize against some of the legislative changes. And also, this is not a sort of grassroots trans project, but the Good Law Project is doing a lot of work on the kind of legal front. So those are some projects that I would give a shout out.
Thank you. Thanks so much. We will hopefully send this out to you in an email, those of you who are attending, so you have direct links, or you know kind of where to, who to support, or if you want to sign up to any of the projects that, for example, Lamble discussed just then. We have another question from Kalpana from SASG, and she asks, in the UK, gender critical feminists whom Lamble talked about are often Islamophobic, representing Muslims as uniquely patriarchal and supporting attacks on them by the state. I wondered how that kind of direct intersection is also operating in the Indian context. So if anyone, wants to speak about this in the Indian context, so kind of the links between Islamophobia and kind of gender critical arguments. Or maybe as an extension of that question, if anyone would like to speak on the intersections between transphobia and Islamophobia and the discourses of them in general. Thank you, Sarah. Sorry. Thank you, Lamble.
That's okay. Well, yes, I'm glad, Kalpana, that you raised that, because I do think what's interesting, so there's a lot of gender critical feminists who, or also I should say, there's a lot of gender critical women who are not feminists. Like Posey Parker is not a feminist. She explicitly says she's not a feminist, but I would say she's one of the key figures that brings together kind of anti-trans and anti-Muslim rhetoric. And it's very central to how she depicts her kind of protecting women And I think we see that really manifest in the right. But I also think we see it manifest in the left, even when they disavow it. So one of the main anti-trans organizations that on the left in Britain was an organization called Women's Place UK, which I'm sure people were aware of. And they made a number of statements that tried to kind of separate out and say, we're concerned about the kind of anti-Islam discourse that's operating in the far right parts of the gender critical movement. We're concerned about the racism. But I think the way in which that they do that disavowal, they're trying to kind of separate out, is precisely a failure to acknowledge that the kind of very logics that they are using operate on the same carceral safety politics. So even though they'll say, oh no, we're just applying this to trans people, we're not applying it to Muslims or to people of color or to migrants, the logic, I think, still repeats and reiterates it. So even as they claim they're not doing it, I think that's part of the broader movement that normalizes these scapegoating discourses. And so I think we have to be attentive to it, not just in its kind of right-wing formations, but also in its kind of left and liberal formations as well.
Thanks, Lamble. We might have a final question, I think, before we close up. So there's a question in the chat which is asking, how useful has a universal periodic reviews been on Pakistan and India, if you've engaged with those processes or people who have? So maybe, Hina, if you know of the universal periodic review, if you would like to speak on it and how useful it's been. Maybe people just aren't aware of the review. Hina has just said, I don't have the proper understanding of it. Okay. Thank you so much for those questions. And thank you so much to our speakers who have really drawn maybe quite alarming pictures of kind of the language of legislation and how it's being used to target trans communities, and how carceral logics have been used to, continue to scapegoat the trans community. Yes, that was a question. What was it? It was the links between Islamophobia and transphobia in India.
Yes, I think I already mostly covered it while I was answering previous question. The idea of finding a scapegoat and combating foreign elements when you want to have this idea of nationalism in general. I don't have much to add apart from that link in terms of Islamophobia and transphobia in India.
Great, thank you. So I'd like to conclude just by thanking everyone who came. Thank you to our audience and attendees. Thank you for the questions that you asked. And of course, thank you to our panelists, Grace, Hina, Arsen, and Lamble.